What's up, friends? It's the nerdy filmmaker here. It's been a while. Well, today we're going to be talking about how to soften your lighting. So today we're going to talk about how to soften your lighting. You generally do it through diffusion or through bouncing light. And it all kind of stems around just this one basic concept that in lighting, size matters. So essentially, the larger your light source is, the softer it's gonna be. And the reason for that is because if you have a large light source, there's more light wrapping around whatever the subject might be. And so it's giving a softer gradient to the shadows or the transition between highlights and shadows. And that's basically all what soft light means. It means that it has a softer gradient leading from the highlights to the shadows. It also helps with reducing what's called spectral highlight, which is kind of that little shiny stuff that you might see on your forehead. And that's like a direct reflection of the light source. So the thicker the diffusion is and the more even it is, the less of that kind of highlight that you have, which might make our faces look greasy or whatever. So in what cases do you want to soften your lighting? What does it actually do? Softer lighting helps hide blemishes and helps hide pimples, helps hide wrinkles, any of that kind of stuff, because it's creating, like I said before, a softer transition and it's hiding a lot of texture on your face. So it reduces the amount of texture that you see on a person's face. And those harsh shadows might also be distracting, not only on a person, but like on a background. So right now, the shadows of this stuff is quite soft. And I'm gonna show you what I'm using right now in a second. It's very simple. So what is diffusion? Well, diffusion is a piece of material that your light is shooting through. Essentially what that's doing is changing the size of the light source from something like this small to something this big, right? And the easiest one for us to all recognize is the sun. So the sun is very, very, very small in the sky. That's why it creates such harsh shadows. That being said, it's all about the relative size of the light. So if we were actually right next to the sun, it'd be like really soft light. It'd be really soft light because it'd be huge. What happens is that on a cloudy day, when the sky fills up with clouds, that creates a larger light source. The clouds become the light source, and because they're all evenly lit and it's diffusing across the entire sky. And so your entire sky becomes your light source. So that's essentially what we're doing, is increasing the size of a smaller light source so it's relatively bigger to the subject. One of the cheapest ways to do this in terms of diffusion or bouncing is with something like this, an umbrella. Okay? La 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 la. So this is actually the first piece of diffusion or reflection that I ever got. This is back in my days of photography. And so, but essentially what this is that you put this in front of your light and the light bounces off of this and out to the subject, and it's creating it into the size of this umbrella. And what's nice about this is that you can actually also unhook everything here and remove the black and turn this into a shoot-through umbrella, which is actually what's lighting me right now. These are really cheap, they're not very expensive. What you need to do is make sure that whatever you're using as a light stand or as a light has an actual spot for this to go through, because if not, you can't use it. But you can get adapters to be able to use umbrellas. Very, very cheap way of increasing the size of your light. Now you can also use, what's more common, is softboxes, right? And softboxes generally attach to the front of your light if you have kind of bigger studio lights. And a softbox will have generally more layers of diffusion, which means it's made more even. They're a lot of times pretty big. They come in different shapes and sizes. You can get strips, you can get squares, you can get huge ones to fill a whole room, you can get small ones for just the head. There is such a thing as going too soft, you know, and we'll talk about that, about when you would use and when you wouldn't use diffusion. Now finally, another way that they do diffusion on film sets is they set up what are called like silks, which are just giant, huge, they're just basically huge frames with a huge piece of diffusion stretched out across it. You can kind of rig that up individually of the light and back the light up and shoot through it. It kind of creates this simulated, really soft sunlight. And we all have diffusion in our homes. We all have sheer curtains over we all have them. I've seen your place. I love your sheer. But yeah, that's essentially diffusion for your windows. And you know, if you're in a real like financial pinch and you're doing this really low budget and you don't want to buy one of these things, you can use white bed sheets or something, as long as it lets a certain amount of light through. Now, another way to diffuse a light is by bouncing. So instead of shooting through an umbrella or a softbox directly onto the person, is to bounce the light off something else. So let's say you have a big piece of white Bristol board or a reflector or even a wall, a white wall. You can bounce the light off of that wall, off that Bristol board, and it creates a much larger light source, because again, then the wall becomes a light source, or the bounce becomes a light source. The danger of bouncing off a wall is that you're also picking up the color of the wall and spreading that color across in your light. The other downside generally to bouncing off of something like a wall is you're not controlling your light. And maybe one day we'll do another video about controlling your light in terms of flagging and cutting where the light is traveling to. And that's really actually sometimes a more important part of lighting a scene, is controlling where the light doesn't go. Now here I have one of my first ever pieces of photo equipment. So this is a bounce, right? Now these, you can literally make these, not the fold up kinds, but you can just use a piece of white Bristol board. I've even taken a white towel and wrapped it around a piece of cardboard before. That's a bounce. But essentially, this is what they look like, right? So one side of this one is silver, one side is white. And these are usually used to fill in the light, right? Which means I would put this here, now this light is bouncing off this and hitting my face. But this can also be used to bounce the main light off of that and then directly into me as what's called the key light, all right? And I'm gonna be getting into all this stuff later on in future videos. But essentially, what's the moral of the story here? To make your light softer, you have to make it bigger. And in order to make it bigger, you gotta shoot through something or you gotta bounce off something. Now, when would you not want to soften your lighting? It depends on if you are doing like portrait work for photography. If you have a model that has really kind of like sharp features and you want to highlight that, or you want that really kind of like dramatic look, like a film noir look, or like kind of like that old school glamour look, you probably want to not diffuse it if the person's skin is so, you know, perfect, unlike the rest of us, that they can take harsh lighting. That stuff really highlights the angles and the sharpness of someone's face, so could be really interesting. Also, if you're shooting a film, you're generally trying to simulate the actual lighting that would be in a space. So for example, if you're shooting outside and there's street lamps are not soft. So if you are then replicating that lighting using your own studio lights or whatever outside, don't like super soften it, because that doesn't make sense. That's when something looks super commercial and glossy and overproduced, is when the lights don't match what's actually supposed to be in the space. So not always do you want to soften. Wow, that was a rough sentence. You don't always want to soften your lighting. So that's it. That's our first video on lighting. It's a quick one, I think. I don't know how long this ended up being, but essentially, if you want to soften your lighting, make it bigger. Coming up, we're going to talk more about how to light someone with one light, multiple lights, different kinds of lights. I don't know. There's a whole world of lighting out there. We'll see if I ever get to it. Who knows? Who knows? Everything that was mentioned in this video in terms of the umbrellas, the reflector, all that or equivalents are going to be in the description below. So if you want to check them out. That's it. That's all, friends. This is the Nerdy Filmmaker signing off. Be cool. Be very cool. I've lost my touch. It's been too long. Oh, fudge.